All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the October 14th, 2014 meeting of the Downers Grove Village Council. It is my privilege to call this meeting to order. I want to point out that there are copies of our agenda on either side of the room tonight. If you haven't already done so, please pick up a copy and you can follow along with our proceedings this evening. There will be multiple opportunities for public comment, both with respect to items that are on our agenda tonight, as well as a segment at item 4, which is reserved for public comments of a general nature with respect to items that are not on tonight's agenda. So if anyone has a question or comment of a general nature, they are welcome to come up during item 4 and share their thoughts or their question with us at that time. It is our proud custom to begin our meetings by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance before our meetings, and we have some special guests tonight. We have Scout Troop, Pack 227, from Kingsley Elementary School here with us tonight. And we spent some time next door. They had a number of questions with respect to the village, and I have a whole list of ones that I wrote down, and so I'm going to assign one out to each of the commissioners and see if you guys can answer them tonight. One has to do with the elevation above sea level of the village Downers Grove, so Commissioner Olson, I want you to take that one then when the time comes.
Thank you.
So if I could ask the scouts to please come up. Come on up here, guys. I'm going to line you right up in front of the riser here. You can spread out down the side there.
This way, guys.
That's a well-disciplined pack right there. All right, we're going to turn around. Flag is here, gentlemen. You want to turn around? And we're going to begin. Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Nice job, gentlemen. Now turn around once to stay where you're at. You gotta stay. We got photos. All right, nice job. Well done, guys. Thank you. I think you earned those citizenship badges tonight. Thank you.
I just wanted to report that Downers Grove is 705 feet above sea level.
See, I told you he'd know the answer to that one. Now, Commissioner Durkin's going to answer your question about what are the advantages and the pros and cons of using that beet juice in the de-icing material that we put on the streets during snow season. And what is the appropriate ratio with that in the ceiling?
I can tell you it saves money, it melts snow faster, it's a natural product, and it's just another example of the village of Downers Grove being green. How's that for?
That's a perfect answer. I like it.
All right, there you
I like it very good. All right, I'm just kidding. There won't be any more questions.
I didn't take that, I'm out.
All right, well, without further ado, then, I'd like to ask our fine village clerk, April Holden, to please call the roll.
Commissioner Jose?
Here.
Commissioner Olson?
Here.
Commissioner Rankin?
Here.
Commissioner Barnett?
Here.
Commissioner Neustadt?
Here.
Commissioner Durkin?
Here.
Mayor Tully?
Here, thank you very much. Next, we come to item 3, which pertains to minutes of prior council meetings. We have one set of minutes to review and approve tonight, and those are our regular council meeting minutes from October 7th, 2014. Are there any changes, questions, comments, or corrections from any members of the village council with respect to those minutes? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it, and those minutes are approved. And just like that, we are at item 4. This is with respect to public comments of a general nature. If there are any members of the audience that have any questions or comments of a general nature, I think you guys might have used up all your questions, so we'll have to take a pass on you. Any questions or comments of a general nature from any members of the audience? Now would be the time to please come to the podium and tell us who you are, and we'd welcome hearing from you. Good evening.
Hello, Jerry Filio. I'm at 1454 Arrowwood Lane, and I'd like to talk about the village signs. We all paid for the Lakota study back pre-1999. It was over $200,000. We have the 1999 master plan and the 2005 sign ordinance that every business has to adhere to. You can see, if you can go back. If you can look at these signs, if you look down the clutter down Ogden Avenue, and by fate, this sign is brand new. That sign is about three years old, way after the code. So if you look down the line of all the clutter, We understand variances and setbacks. I think the actual setback of the road or the property is out on the curb. But if we look at our nice, beautiful Welcome to Downers Grove sign, if you look at where that's located, just off the curb, it's 2 feet off the curb. We do have a bus stop over here. On the other side of the street, on the east side of the street, we have a lot of office buildings. So it'd be nice to move this sign. I did find out that you have this in your plan to move that sign, but it's should have been done in 2005. So I don't know why we're doing it this far late. We have, you folks are setting up to give people violations and having them pay money if they didn't move their sign. And also, we have all the park, I know this is not the park district, but we have a lot of park district signs, and if you think of children, where do children go? They go to parks. So we have all these parks district signs that are well up by the right-of-way, and they all need to be moved. Secondly, I know I'm advancing to the next, one of the topics about a traffic box. You have a company that's going to do the traffic box that's on the consent agenda. But if you can keep in mind to keep these boxes away from the right-of-way, this box is at Downers Grove North High School. Over here is the pedestrian, or the drop-off for all the students. And if you're pulling up, you're going to look left, you're going to look right, and then you're going to make your turn. But if you look right here, there's no one there. Well, actually, there's someone there. Their head is right there as my shaky hand. And here's the person standing here. So if you guys could try to watch, I know community development isn't here, but if we can try to push these boxes back, it can be done. It was done on Main Street and Curtis, the box right by the bank. It's set nice far back. So if you could just be cognizant of that. This is a county road, but Grant Street is your street, so you have all, by all means, rights to have that sign move, the box moved back. It would have cost, $2,000 to $4,000. It's just cable, but this is one of the busiest intersections other than the Main Street train station. Secondly, with respect to the fire station, you may want to think about an alternate location. We all know that site is heavily polluted, but also with the amount of wetlands that are there. I looked at doing a development there, and the actual buildable area, if you look at stormwater, and I'm not sure what type of wetlands those are. It depends on the type of wetlands. Your stormwater pond actually have to be further back away from the wetlands, and I know that area floods, so you may also want to consider increasing the ponds, making the ponds double-sized to help the flooding in that area while you're doing that project. But by the time you're finished with everything, your square foot area for the parking lot and building will really be small. So, thank you.
Thank you for sharing those comments with us. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor Tully and members of the council. Rick Ashton, Director of the Downers Grove Public Library. I'm here this evening to thank the Village of Downers Grove for your great help and cooperation throughout the library's building renovation project. Your administrative staff and your buildings department staff and the fire department and all parts of the Village of Downers Grove have been very supportive as we have turned the library inside out and upside down for the past 6 months. So we want especially to thank you as leadership of the village for the great support and help we've had throughout the project. And I want to remind you that this coming Saturday, October 18th, from 10 to 3, is a series of activities to celebrate the completion of the renovation. There will be a brief dedication ceremony at 10 a.m. Mayor Tully, I understand you're going to come and speak on that occasion, and we'll be very glad to hear from you. And we welcome all of you and everyone else to have a good time with us on Saturday and celebrate the completion of this project. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Thank you very much for sharing that with the community. I know everyone's looking forward to seeing the new facility and celebrating its christening, so to speak. Other questions or comments of a general nature? Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor Tully, Commissioners, staff. I'm Gordon Goodman. I live at 5834 Mid-Aw, and there were a couple general comments I'd like to make. First, I'd like to invite you and the rest of the community to come to the annual meeting of Pierce Downers Heritage Alliance, which will be held on Thursday, the 23rd. This year, we'll be holding our meeting in the multipurpose room in the lower level of the Recreation Center on Belmont Road, 4500 Belmont Road. And the two principal speakers will be Sarah Stansuk, who is the museum curator for the Park District's museum, and she'll tell us both about the museum and also about how to research the history of your home. And the second speaker will be Lisa Hederin, and she will talk to us about a project, Quertus, which is a coalition of environmental organizations that are, and government bodies that are working to preserve and increase the survivability of oak forests in this area. The second point I would like to make in general comments is that I wanted to report to you that the work on the proposed historic district along Maple Avenue between Main Street and the Burlington Tracks is proceeding. There were two very well-attended meetings held last couple of weeks in Lincoln Center, and the committee that is working toward this is now canvassing the property owners for whom they've obtained data and working to identify those who support the district and those who are not going to support the district. Currently, they have about 20% of the petitions signed from, or 20% of the petitions that will be needed to be signed, as you will recall, in order to form a historic district in Downers Grove under your ordinance. 51%, more than half of the property owners in that proposed district have to petition the village to consider it, and then it would, if such a petition were submitted, be up to you and the Architectural Design Review Committee to review that and decide about the district. So that's moving ahead, and I'm sure that many of you I did see at the meeting, so I know at least several of you are well aware of what is going on there. I have some other comments that will probably be more appropriate under your first reading agenda, but those were things that I wanted to bring to your attention at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other questions or comments of a general nature with respect to items not appearing on tonight's agenda? Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Bob Peterson. I live at 6861 Camden Road, Downers Grove, and I also own Leibenguth Moving and Storage, 1301 Warren Avenue in Downers Grove. It's been there for over 80-some years. I'm here again to talk about my signs along the railroad tracks. And the information, or some of the information that I have received, and I've had some good input last week that I was here, that something possibly could be looked into as far as turning the railroad tracks into having some signs, or even looking into it. As I was told that the railroad tracks were never even considered in part of the sign ordinance originally. That's totally overlooked, and I got that information just directly from one of the board members, that they never even thought of it. And I'm bringing, in regards to being a business-friendly community, is that sign on the back of my warehouse, it's been there for in excess of 65, maybe 70 years, attracts, or at least shows, at least 3 million people a year to try to get business from. And getting business is what I'm there for and in town for. The ordinance originally was about to beautify the Downers Grove area and not compliance. The signs along the track, as long as you have the signs, as long as they're kept up with and they look nice, which mine are, I keep mine updated probably every 4 or 5, maybe 6 years, depending on weathering. I just painted one 2 years ago to have it look good. And just a little bit off track over here with the signs along the tracks is I kind of compared it with going into a town with Christmas decorations. You got lights, trees, and everything looks nice in the community when you go through the neighborhoods and how nice they take care of the area. Then you go through another neighborhood that has nothing. That's what the tracks are going to be looking like with no signs. It's always nicer to look at some signs of people riding the train to and from work. They have a choice of maybe plumbers, electricians, somebody advertising what they do. So you just sit there, look out the window, and you see signs. And as long as they're kept up to maybe the code, or every 2 years or 3 years to be reviewed, to look at them, make sure they're up to date, and get them taken care of. So they do look nice. And I think it enhances the community for the tracks versus looking bare and desolate with nothing there. I'm just kind of asking for your support. Leibengluth Moving Storage has supported Downers Grove for over 80 years. I've lived here all my life, never moved out of town except for when I was in service. And I think my sign is probably the only one of its kind left in Downers Grove, being painted on the buildings, front and back. And you won't find another one in Downers Grove. Why destroy it? Paint over it, nothing's there. Now what do you got? You got nothing. And I think it just beautifies the area from the standpoint of just being part of the railroad. And I hope to get a little bit more support, because I'm approaching a deadline with Stan, and I don't know what to do. Your help is greatly needed for me to try to stay in business for as long as I possibly can. Been there 82, maybe 83 years, and I don't know how much longer I can stay there if I can't have my signs to promote business. And a business card doesn't hack it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, and welcome back again. I'm sure, as you know, and for those who maybe weren't here when it happened, there was a couple of attempts to make a motion. Last time it was seconded in terms of providing potentially, or looking at potentially providing some relief for your situation, although it wouldn't be a cure-all, and that just hasn't garnered the majority support of the council to date. But thank you for being here again. Yes, other questions or comments of general nature?
Good evening, Laura Bowen, 829 Clyde Drive. Regarding the Leibengluth sign, there are quite a few retail outlets or stores along the Burlington tracks in Downers Grove, whether it's the Fairview station or the Belmont station, that their signs are visible to the train riders. And I think that you should provide that opportunity to Leibengluth as well. It's a promotional opportunity and an advertising, method of advertising, so that people know what's here in Downers Grove, like he said. I also want to tack on to what Jerry mentioned earlier about the signage. We have been mentioning to the village, and Public Works should be called attention to this issue with signs that are posted, whether it's stop signs or yield signs, that have foliage growing over them. You can't see them from afar until you get right on top of the sign, so you should be asking the forestry department or whoever is responsible for trimming those tree branches away from the signs, in addition to the growth that's at sidewalk level that blocks people's vision from what's coming across the crosswalk. We've called attention to that in the past with pictures to you, and I believe that's still occurring around certain areas in the village. And I thought we had an ordinance to that effect that's, maybe we should be addressing that a little bit more. Also with the safety issue with the alley at the library, the newspaper box that's sitting there at the alley and the sidewalk is also a vision blind to people that are pedestrians, the cars that come down the alley. Can't see the pedestrians and the dog walkers that are along there. And there are a lot of children that walk along there when the cars come out of that alley, and they're not always looking for the pedestrians, and that box doesn't have newspapers in it. It's just a piece of metal that's in the way. You've already removed the one that was at the Burlington and Forest, and I thank you for that, but the one that sits next to the library has not been removed yet, and I ask that you do that.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Thank you for being here tonight. Other questions or comments of a general nature with respect to items not appearing on our agenda tonight? Welcome back.
Thank you. I don't want to cut anyone else off, but I did want to also support what Laurel Bowen was saying about the need to make the roadside signs visible. I've noticed that there are overgrown signs, and in particular, when we got back in town, I was trying to check on speed limits on various sections of Downers Grove streets, and I found that it was impossible to find or to see behind the foliage in some of those cases. So please do ask your staff to update their trimming of roadside vegetation so the signs, traffic signs are all visible. Thank you.
And thank you. I know we do our best to do that, and I think over time, I myself and others have probably identified situations like that, have phoned them in, and at least on the ones I've reported, they're usually addressed pretty quickly.
Right, and I think we can pick out individual signs, but I think it is the responsibility of the staff to every once in a while canvass the streets and find out where there are problems rather than wait for them to be called to their attention by individuals in the community. And I also wanted to emphasize that this was a particularly good growing year for the trees with the damp conditions, and so that may be another reason why we're seeing this problem particularly noticeably at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments of a general nature from any members of the audience with respect to items not appearing on tonight's agenda? Very good. Well, thank you for everyone that spoke and shared their views with us. We always appreciate that. That brings us to item number 5 on our agenda, which is reserved for council member reports. This is an opportunity for members of the village council to share items of interest or other goings on in the community with the rest of our fellow residents. I think tonight we'll start with Commissioner Barnett.
No report, Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Olson.
One thing, Mayor, I just wanted to announce that this Sunday, October 19th, is the 29th annual South DuPage Crop Walk for Hunger. It's going to be held at Gloria Day Church, right across from North High School. 1:30 is registration and 2 o'clock is the step-off. 75% of the proceeds go to fight world hunger, and 25% of the proceeds stay in our local community for food depository pads, etc. So just hope that members of the community can get out this weekend and support a great cause. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Jose.
Thank you, Mayor. In case you haven't noticed from all the political ads on TV, there's an election coming up. And Downers Grove Village Hall is an early voting site starting on Monday, October the 20th, and that goes through Saturday, November the 1st. Monday through Friday, the voting hours are between 8:30 a.m. and 7:30 p.m., and on Saturdays from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So if you'd like to come out and vote early, I hope you take advantage of it. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Rankin.
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Durkin.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We have an upcoming coffee with council at 9 o'clock this Saturday at Fire Station 2, which is on 5420 Main Street, and we'll be there 9 to 10. And then afterwards, as we know, the mayor will be at the library, so I want to know how you're going to make it there in less than a second's time.
It's called an Opticon.
There you go. Hope to see you there. We'll be discussing the budget.
Yes, and just by clarification, thank you for mentioning that, just for clarification, it is a coffee with the council that is focused on discussion of the budget, but of course, if folks have other issues that they want to bring to our attention during that opportunity, we certainly don't foreclose them from doing so. Thank you for mentioning that. Commissioner Newstead.
Thank you, Mayor. I was going to talk about ornaments for the holiday tree, but our Boy Scout guests have already left the premises. But since I've already said it, we are looking for handmade ornaments for our holiday tree down by the Main Street train station. A lot more information on our website, right on the front page today. Also, on Monday, District 58, and I think District 99 has done some recently too, the Downers Grove Police Department, in conjunction, in partnership with the school districts, have done some lockdown drills. The lockdown drill I participated in through my employer at work on Monday was at O'Neill. It's very interesting to see the leadership and the knowledge exuded by our police department and how they offer suggestions and tips for our schools and our administration, staff, and students on how to prepare for the unhopeful event of a lockdown situation in our schools. Having been there for the drill, I can say that our schools, our teachers, our administrators, and students are very well prepared, thanks to Lieutenant Mike Willison and the Downers Grove Police Department for their excellent plans on what to do. And it's not really something you can plan for, but they definitely try to help in every way they can. So it was interesting to see that. Wanted to report out that we are very well covered in that area as far as preparation goes. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to the police department for that help.
Thank you. Between the speakers earlier and my colleagues, I think all the goings-on in the community have been covered. So I will move right to item 6, which is reserved for public hearings. There are no public hearings tonight, so we'll go right to item 7, which is the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Any questions or comments from members of the audience with respect to any of the items on the consent agenda? Good evening again.
Good evening again, Mayor. I'm still Gordon Goodman, and I'm still interested in trees. And I'm supportive of the proposed change order to permit adequate removal of dead and diseased trees. But I wondered, with this apparent increase in the number of trees that have to be removed this year, is there also a plan to increase the number of trees to be, replacement trees to be put in the parkway? Is that something that might be coming later?
I'll ask our village manager to address that.
Yes, we've actually created a new capital project for the replacement of the trees that are being removed due to the infestation of emerald ash borer. There's a great little 2-page memo attached to the manager's message about the budget. So yes, it's an accelerated replacement plan.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on any of the items on the consent agenda tonight? Questions or comments from members of the village council on any of the items on the consent agenda tonight? Hearing none, may I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, consent agenda passes unanimously. That brings us to the active agenda, item 8. We have no items on our active agenda tonight, so we will go right to our first reading or our workshop agenda. This is the portion of the agenda where we entertain items for presentation and discussion only. No action will be taken tonight, but action is intended to be taken potentially at a future point in time. We have 2 items on our first reading or workshop agenda tonight, items 9A and 9B. As is customary, I'll ask the village manager to please have staff introduce both items for discussion by both the audience and the village council. Mr. Fieldman.
Thank you, Mayor Tully. The first item is consideration of an ordinance that would repeal the Community Grants Commission and the Community Grants Program. This was placed on the agenda as directed by the village council during last week's meeting under new business. We're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. And just by way of further introduction, this was an item that I asked that be brought up because, as I think has been accurately reported, the Community Grants Commission was unfunded or defunded several years ago during the depths of the recession, as were a lot of other hard decisions were made. but it was essentially put into mothballs. The Community Grants Commission, and I won't go into the history of it, we did that previously when we discussed this item, has benefited a number of different cultural and other organizations in town, some of which are still with us and doing fine, some of which aren't. But the point was that the Community Grants Commission was still there on the books, if you will. There were people that technically were still on it because they hadn't been replaced and they serve until they are, but they weren't doing anything and the commission had no funding, so there wasn't anything for it to do. And so rather than leave it languish, I had asked that we address, and in fact, residents, including Dr. Goodman, had asked in the past as part of our budget discussion to revisit the subject of whether it should be restored to its former functionality, or if not, then it should be removed from the books so that the expectations of the community and other organizations in town, not-for-profits and other cultural organizations that have or may have in the future benefited from this will no longer expect to receive that support, at least from the village. We discussed it, bless you, we discussed the issue last week, and there wasn't any majority support for refunding it or restoring it, and so given that, the next logical conclusion was to basically once and for all conclude that it should be no longer one of the boards and commissions that we have, and its members should be thanked for their service and asked to perhaps apply for other boards if they want to continue in service to the community. But at least it wouldn't just sit there dormant and inactive without any purpose. So that's what brought us here tonight, just by way of introduction for those who may have missed the conversation that took place previously. So with that further clarification and background, I'll ask if there are any questions or comments from the audience with respect to the item that is under the active agenda, or I'm sorry, the first reading or workshop agenda, item 9A, an ordinance to repeal the Community Grants Commission. I deliberately talked a long time, figuring I'd give you the opportunity to get up there, Dr. Goodman. Good evening again.
Good evening again. Well, yes, you gave a very good introduction to this issue and how it appeared on our agenda for tonight. At the workshop meeting, which I guess I was surprised and we didn't really have any opportunity for people to be aware that this was coming up. The week before, when it was discussed, at that time you did give a much more expanded explanation of the history of why we had been supporting arts organizations in connection with the adoption of the hotel tax, which was to support the cultural attractions of the community so that it would perhaps bring more people to stay in Downers Grove. And I think that's still a very desirable goal of our community and of the village government. But we don't have the same support for that among the elected officials that we did when we adopted the hotel tax. And the plan for using a certain percentage of that to support community organizations, particularly in the performing arts and other things that make our community attractive, and may have led to the ranking of our community as one of the better places to live and one of the more friendly places in the state. But I'm sorry to see this, which I regarded as a very positive forward step of the village, taken away from it. Many of the organizations that I communicated with when I knew that this was coming before the council, such as the Senior Orchestra and the Senior Center, expressed their hope that this would be an indication the village was interested in supporting their activities again. And quite apart from whether you have a community grants commission and a community grants program, and/or set aside a portion of the hotel tax to support these activities, I think it's very important for the village officials to continue to evaluate whether supporting these activities is something that is in the best interests of the community and appropriate action for the village government. I noticed that, I believe it was Commissioner Jose brought up that possibility when you were discussing whether you wanted to disband the Community Grants Commission, that there was always a possibility of doing ad hoc support of individual community efforts that carried out a public function and would be something that did get a majority support on the council. So I'd like to reiterate that I'm very sad to see this step, and I think it is regressive, and I wish we had back some of the former council members. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Other questions or comments on this item from members of the audience? Questions or comments from members of the village council? I'll just add that I think it is unfortunate. I think that it was a very valuable part of the community for a long time. I think I understand why the decision was made to end it when it did. I think perhaps I was overly optimistically hopeful that it might come back someday and serve that purpose again. But I also agree that it shouldn't just sit there in limbo in perpetuity. If there's not a majority of the councils in favor of ever restoring it to what it was in some fashion, then so be it. We need to be honest with the community and manage expectations. And if it's not going to be, then because we do occasionally get requests from organizations asking, because they see it on the website, the program is still listed there, whether there's some possibility for partnership with the community to do something like this, and we ought to just be straightforward and manage expectations. Any other questions or comments? Next item, please.
The next item is consideration of the ordinance approving the FY15 budget, but this really is just another opportunity for further dialogue about the proposed FY15 budget. We did present and discuss in some detail the proposed budget on Saturday at our budget workshop, and there are many more opportunities, including tonight, to discuss the budget before it is scheduled for an approval in late November, and if we need extra time, it can go into December as well. So we don't have any further presentation, but we would be happy to answer any questions the council may have.
Thank you. And just to expand on that, the budget was publicly available now, has been publicly available now for a couple of weeks at least, and we did have a 3.5-hour give or take meeting on Saturday morning at Fire Station Number 2, which was fairly well attended by historic standards, and we heard a lot of good comments and input from those who were there on the various topics that were discussed, at least as far as we did for those segments of the budget that we went through. As the village manager noted, that was the first sort of kickoff discussion of the proposed fiscal 2015 budget. We will continue to discuss it for a number of meetings. Tonight is another opportunity for public input and further discussion and dialogues amongst the council. And then, of course, the Coffee with the Council meeting that was mentioned that will take place on Saturday from 9 to 10. And then obviously any other council meeting between now and ultimate adoption of the budget is another opportunity for members of the public to share their views, provide input, raise any questions, or for members of the council to also ask questions, engage in further conversation, so on and so forth.
I will also add that we have been talking about potential changes to the structure of the stormwater utility. Staff will place that on a first reading agenda for Tuesday, November 4th, and will provide all the backup documentation and analysis that we are preparing now. So while that's a concurrent discussion, there will be a special evening, special place on the November 4th agenda for that discussion in detail.
Thank you for that addition. So with that further clarification and introduction, I'll start off with, are there any questions or comments with respect to the proposed fiscal 2015 budget for the Village of Downers Grove from any members of the audience? Please.
Good evening, Laura Bowen, 829 Clyde Drive. Each election, an average of 3 out of 10 voters actually exercise their right to vote in Downers Grove. As a result, a minimum of the Downers Grove residents voted this village council into office. If asked, you would say that you represent everyone in the Downers Grove community. A referendum initiated by this council would ensure that the decision you make is the will of the people you represent. It would also provide another opportunity to inform the public and engage them prior to this spring's village election, and possibly increase the turnout. 2 of you plan to run for mayor of Downers Grove. Is it the leadership service you wish to provide or the power you crave? Currently, 7 retail spaces lie vacant along downtown Main Street. Perhaps we should focus on invigorating the small business environment in Downers Grove rather than empire building. And I'm referring to this village redevelopment project that you have proposed. This village must exercise the fiscal restraint we taxpayers do. Your political objective should not come before financial health of our community. In closing, people do not follow titles. They follow leaders with courage.
Thank you for your comments. Any other questions or comments with respect to the proposed fiscal 2015 budget for the Village of Downers Grove? Welcome back. I think I may have to go back to maybe 2005, the last time I can recall that we saw you this many times at the podium, Dr. Goodman. I could be off by a year or two.
Yes, well.
So you might, it could be a record in the breaking tonight.
No, I think that before that, there were many.
I meant that in the most positive way.
Yeah, right. I was sort of tapering off by 2005. And you may have noticed.
Fair point.
that I'm tapering even more these
Fair
days.
point.
But I did want to say something about one of the important issues that has been one of my themes since the 70s, and that is the stormwater management in the village. And I'm pleased to see that it's getting a resurgence of attention, particularly with the emphasis, the exclamation point of April 2013. But it's important now to, you're trying to marshal resources, you're doing a good job setting aside a particular capital improvements fund and doing a lot of planning of how you will get adequate resources to do the structural improvements that your engineering studies say are needed. But in addition to those, and as a parallel step, you are beginning already to recognize the theme that I think is very important, and that is that not all development on all parcels in Downers Grove is appropriate. There are some parcels that are floodways. They're still zoned for residential or commercial use, but they are a part of the stormwater management system. And structures that exist in them are inappropriate. There are many locations in Downers Grove, particularly in that west branch of St. Joe Creek, where there was such bad flooding in April 2013, where people have encroached on the streamway and built dikes along it so that they can use the land for homes. That's just not going to continue to be acceptable, because the village then has to provide alternative patterns for the creek and retention areas, detention areas for the water which would normally flow there. So I'm very supportive of the steps that the village had taken in the area of Grant and Lee to buy up properties that were flooded and no longer reasonable to rehabilitate. I think that that should be done throughout the community, and I'm hopeful that you will develop a plan for property acquisition, even those properties which are currently developed. Not just when they come on the market, but according to a plan of engineering need, and move forward with that. So I think there's been some indications that the staff and you are thinking correctly about that, but I'm of the impression that it's not a priority for this stormwater management phase that you're going into yet. And I wanted to stand before you again and reiterate my thought that that time is now coming, and that should be an important component of your stormwater management plan, not just building new pipes and designed retention areas. There are still vacant properties in the village that should be bought for stormwater management rather than allowed to be developed. There are other properties that should have been bought some time ago and now have structures on them, and they should be analyzed and bought in order to supplement the structures that you're going to be building. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your views with us. Other questions or comments from the audience? All right, thank you for that. Questions or comments, observations from members of the Village Council at this juncture? Commissioner Barnett?
Thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to take tonight and start a dialogue and really probably just introduce it tonight because I'm kind of springing it on everybody. But it relates to our budget and it relates to our process. And I'm going to use probably a bad analogy, but it's the only one that I can come up with, so bear with me.
It's my favorite kind.
I'll let that go. There are, when you look at a organization, whether it be a private organization who has manufacturing and sales and building maintenance and HR and various other things, or it's a baseball team that has 9 players. Each of those elements is critical in one way to the organization, but likely they don't all have the same level. And what I'm getting to is I'd like us to find a way, not for the budget that sits before us, but for the budget, the next one that's coming. And that's why I'm starting a year plus in advance. I'd like us to start a conversation probably in the spring, perhaps early summer, before we get into long-range planning, where we're asking ourselves, we're asking each other, we're asking our staff, what can we not do? And what I mean is, if you take I'll go back to the bad baseball analogy, you got to have 9 guys on the field. But you may at some point decide, I'm willing to put up with kind of a mediocre right fielder if it can free up another couple $1 million for pitching. And to that end, what I don't see us doing, and I don't feel like we've done well enough as an organization, is ask the questions about service levels, the hard questions about service levels. Do we even understand what it is we're evaluating? We have sort of an overlying policy that says, or philosophy that says we're going to provide exceptional services, and that in and of itself sort of demands that those services are always at least maintained, often enhanced, which has the tendency to constantly increase the cost of providing those services. I want to ask if those maybe ought to be actually asked, could we provide a lower level of service? I don't know what the answer to that question is. None of us clearly are going to tonight, but in my mind, it's the kind of thing where we say to our staff in the spring, before we get to LRP, before we really start talking, long before we start talking about next fall's budget, our staff knows obviously what we do as a village. We provide, 300 services of one type or another. Clearly, not all of them are real big opportunities for change or savings. But I bet there's 5, 4, half a dozen maybe, where they know the real impacts are huge and there are some opportunities, and they know that the 7 of us would be able to engage in a conversation seriously about service levels. So it's tough to frame it up saying, I want to talk about reducing service levels, because that sort of sounds ridiculous. But I think it's a question that we're not doing our best to answer. And we may find that there's opportunities for savings. We may find by engaging in the conversation that we talk to each other and with each other in a way we haven't before, and the public gets involved, and we find that there's places where what we think is an exceptional service level really needs to go up. But what we've done the last little while, certainly I'm party to it, so I'm not blaming anybody, but is kind of focus on maintaining or improving those things we have and never really ask deeply about that question. And so I just want to introduce it because it's a budget thing that if we don't talk about it till sort of halfway through LRP, it won't be something we have an opportunity to discuss. We just won't, there won't be enough time to have that kind of a dialogue and engage staff in that kind of way. So that's why I'm talking about it now. It's a little out of place, a little out of time. It doesn't really talk about 2015 budget, but I think it's a 2016 budget question that I'd like to somehow get us really talking about. So, Mayor, apologize for the slight rabbit trail there, but I think you get the point, and I want to just introduce it tonight.
No, I get the point, and appreciate you raising it, because no one will accuse you of having not raised it early. You're right, it doesn't pertain to the topic that's on the table, but it does, and you're right, it's probably too late at LR long-range planning. But the question I would add to that is, that's a discussion I think we can have at any time. Let's take the current budget, fiscal 2015 as proposed, and we've all said it more than one way, is a terrific document that lays out what the village does in many respects, at least at a certain level. And it attributes a dollar amount to it. So you may not know what the service level is, but you know what the cost is. And you know whether it's something that we do. And I think even the descriptions and the narratives, particularly as they exist now, do a pretty good job of highlighting what at least the document thinks is important. And I know that staff, of course, has a pretty good handle on what you would call best practices. And I think even we up here will occasionally ask the question, well, what do our peers do? Are we keeping up with the Joneses, or are we the Joneses? And I think that's really the question you're asking, is should we keep up with the Joneses, be the Joneses, or forget about the Joneses? What I would add to the conversation, Commissioners, I think it's a perfectly legitimate conversation to have, is how do we go about identifying what it is that would be arguably less important than something else. And it may not be that you cut something and add something else, it may be a reallocation, as you're suggesting. Don't know. But we need to identify a process for identifying what would be proposed. Maybe somebody would have to say, we just did one here tonight or recently where there was a decision made of something that was not important, and that was community grants. So there you go. Something was identified and a decision was made. What I would encourage folks to do is, what I don't want to have is a conversation where we're just kind of sitting around looking at a budget and what do you think, or what do you think? Well, I don't know, what do you think? What do you people think? And I think we ought to come up with some time frame, some process by which to identify what those things might be. Because I don't think it's fair to just sort of throw the book at staff, say, here's the budget from 2015. Now tell me in 2016 what you might not want to do or do more or less, unless we give them some kind of parameters within which to operate. So I think it's incumbent upon us, and I know this is where you're going, is to have a conversation to do that, but I'm just putting a finer point on it. I think we need to have some kind of a direction to staff and say, here are the 5 areas that we've identified that we think we need to know. Where do we stand in the world? Pick comparable communities, population, ones that have fire departments, the usual measurements that we look at when we compare comparables. And then decide, is this something where we want to be at, above, or below, sort of the way it's done. But I think it's incumbent on us to identify those things. And I'm glad you're doing it well in advance. Again, no one's going to criticize you for not having raised it early. That's for sure. But I think we need to do that, so I think if we're gonna talk about it, yes, it should be before long-range planning, because by then, you're planning for something you've already decided to do. I agree with you. We'll need to identify what those things are, or if we need assistance from the professionals, which sit to our right, or your left, I think we need to give them some guidance in terms of what it is we want them to come back and tell us so that we can make an informed decision. And more importantly, so that the community can engage in those kind of value judgments. Because I don't think the community necessarily knows what the Joneses are or how we compare to the Joneses. But I think we have to try to identify some things. But I think that the starting point is, it is the fiscal 2015 budget, because it does lay out pretty well what the services are that we offer, the dollars that are associated with it, the time frame involved. You get an idea of whether we're at recommended levels or not. And if your question is, well, those are recommended levels based on what metric?
We had a discussion very similar to this in the summer of 2009 in a reactionary mode due to the onset of the Great Recession. In that long-range financial planning, we identified over 300 individual services provided by the village, talked about service levels, did some prioritization, and asked some of these very same questions. So we have a pretty good handle and been pretty successful in the past about how to introduce it, how to frame up the policy discussion. So if we have that direction, that is something I think that fits well into a spring timeframe, given our current workload and the potential change in a council due to the normal election processes. So somewhere around May makes sense to staff, because there's a lot of legwork to go into preparing those things up front, and it would align in, it's the same schedule we used in '09 going into the 2010 budget meeting process, and that seemed to give us ample time for some pretty deep and meaningful discussions about service levels.
That's a fair observation, and I would add, though, that it's a little bit different now, because as you point out, that was reactionary, and you were basically being told, you're losing X millions of dollars, fix it, do something about it. Where Commissioner Barnett's raising it a little differently, he's not necessarily saying, pretend that you've lost all your LDG, local government distributed fund dollars, what would you do? I think he's talking more about, that might be one way of going about it, but it might also be a reallocation. Or maybe even enhancing certain services depending on those value judgments. So I think you're right, there's a framework for it, but I think what Commissioner Barnett's getting at is a little bit broader. Again, not to put words in your mouth.
No, it is, you're right, Mayor, you've said it exactly right. The reason I bring it now is because the process to get to a point where you can have a meaningful discussion with us is just not quick. So if we wait till after the budget and wait till after the levy and then wait till everybody gets past New Year's and then start trying to think about how we're gonna keep an even keel in the 3 crazy months that lead up to an election, and then we're going to talk about planning for our LRP meetings, and all of a sudden you're out of time. So that's why I wanted to introduce it now and start talking about it, because I really do think that it's something we should do, and I think you've characterized it accurately, Mayor.
I just wanted to add, I think this is a great idea. I think the idea of constantly reassessing whether, in any organization, as Commissioner Barnett mentioned, the constant reassessment of what you're doing, sort of the red, yellow, green, what should we doing, what should we be doing that we should stop, what should we be doing that we should continue, and what should we be doing that, or what are we doing that we should stop, what are we doing that we should continue, and what are we doing that we could accelerate. I think those are the type of discussions that we need to have, and I would support having those discussions. The other thing, the mayor has commented significantly about comparisons to others, and I think that is valuable, but also not always the whole picture. I think that this community is very unique in certain ways, and sometimes I find that saying, oh, well, in Wheaton they do this, and in Naperville they do this, or in Lombard, well, that really is kind of irrelevant to me. I think it's what our community wants as well. So I think that getting all that data and getting the engagement through a process like Commissioner Barnett mentioned, which is allows the community to engage, I would strongly support that.
Yeah, that's right, although I think having some baseline for comparison is important, because if you were to ask somebody on the street, and I'll just pick one that most people can relate to, is what should the response time be for an ambulance to show up at your door when you pick up the phone and call 911? I mean, most of us are going to say 2 minutes ago, but you have to know what does that mean in order to make a judgment about whether we could live with another 30 seconds or not. And I'm taking an extreme one on purpose. There are plenty of other things that you could look at, but there does have to be some kind of understanding, and you're right, Commissioner, that's why I use the Joneses and keeping up with the Joneses. Sometimes you don't want to be the Joneses.
Right.
But you have to know who the Joneses are and what they're doing in order to understand whether you want to be like them or not, or whether you want to be the Joneses. That's all I'm getting at. I think that information is not only helpful for the council to make decisions, but also for the public to weigh in.
Absolutely.
To make, and then ultimately, that's what matters.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to switch gears and kind of go back to Dr. Goodman's comments about flood-prone structures. Just today, I'm not sure when we actually got it, but I have a news release that FEMA awarded the village $820,000 of hazard mitigation funds that will be used to acquire and demolish 4 flood-prone structures. Not only is it part of our plan to have identified structures, identified parcels, but it also is part of our plan to find other revenue sources to take care of those expenses. This is a great success story for our village. A lot of hard work went into this. I know our grants writer and coordinator really went out of their way. Anytime you get $800,000+ for anything, it's a victory. So we do have a plan. We have identified properties throughout the village, and here we are having a way to pay for it. So it's a good success story and part of this budget. That's all I had. And, you know, to Commissioner Barnett's point, I think it's important always to look at these things, and the timing is good to start talking about it now. I think if we give direction to staff, it'll be on their lower oven, back burner, microwave in the garage, whatever you want to call it. But I want to be clear that it's not just about reduction in services, and I think Bob hit it on the head, that it could be the other way, an enhancement. We do so many things. There's a list of 300 out there. We may decide as a council through our community interaction that we want to have a faster response time, or more streets plowed within a certain amount of hours, or whatever it may be, whatever service we're talking about. So let's just be aware that that can go the other way as well, and enhancement can be an opportunity through a discussion like that.
And of course, we do have the information from TCD3 to some degree to look at, where we actually did spend a lot of time out in the community asking people what services were important and what their expectations were. So we're not completely flying blind in that respect. We do have helpful information from that endeavor as well. So I know everyone's probably forgotten we were talking about the fiscal 2015 proposed budget. I don't want to short shrift this discussion. I think it's a very positive and a very important one going forward. But either on that subject or on the subject of the 2015 proposed budget in particular. Questions or comments? And we had a very good conversation on Saturday. I think it was a terrific dialogue, and obviously, as was pointed out, we do start discussing the things that drive the budget much, much earlier in the season. It's what the budget ultimately reflects, which is a good process. Any final thoughts for tonight on this topic? Hearing none.
That ends our first reading tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you very much. It brings us to item 10, which is the mayor's report. I have no report at this point in time, so it brings us to item 11, the manager's report. Mr. Fieldman?
No report tonight, Mayor.
Thank you, sir. It brings us to item 12, village attorney's report. Ms. Petrarca?
Thank you, Mayor. One item to present this evening, that is an ordinance repealing the Community Events Commission. It will appear on next week's active agenda. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. That brings us to item 13, council member new business. And for the second week in a row, we have some items of new business that were previously introduced by members of the council, and they're on the agenda for discussion tonight. As we have been doing in the past, the individual who first initiated the item for inclusion on the agenda, I've been asking to introduce it for discussion. We have two tonight. The first one is 13A, which was a proposed advisory referendum question regarding a change to the structure of our current stormwater utility. That was something that I brought up, so I will introduce that in a moment. The other one was a proposed advisory referendum question that Commissioner Olson identified as pertaining to the proposed municipal facilities project, and we'll get to that point and ask you to introduce that as well, Commissioner.
Absolutely.
With respect to the proposed referendum question, or advisory referendum question regarding the stormwater utility, the particular point that I raised was twofold. We had a conversation in the last couple of weeks about whether or not to exclude from the stormwater utility. What I mean by exclude, I mean exclude paying into the stormwater utility and the stormwater fund of the village any tax-exempt parcels, and then there was a sub-discussion of whether or not there should be exclusion of houses of worship. So tax-exempt parcels, but that were primarily churches and houses of worship. There were two reasons why I brought this up, because it's not, the referendum, advisory referendum question is one, as you'll find out when we talk about Commissioner Olson's item, is one that I think should not be raised lightly, and it's one that I think I've suggested 10 years, maybe once. This may be the one time. And the reason for it, and I want to explain this a little bit further to my colleagues, is twofold. Number one, we've been talking about the stormwater utility and who it encompass for many, many years. We were talking about the stormwater utility and who it encompass since at least 2011, when the majority of the council decided to go forward. I think it was a 6-1 vote at that time to go forward with the creation of a stormwater utility, and it was one that at that time was contemplated to include tax-exempt parcels. So that conversation has been taking place for some time. The makeup of the council has changed, but there's sort of been a constant there with some dissenters, no question about it. But clearly the majority has always been to include tax-exempt parcels. When the stormwater utility was formally adopted in, I think it was April of 2012, it was more or less the same thing. There were some dissenting voices, but the concept was always to include all tax-exempt parcels. When the stormwater utility was then implemented in January of 2013, once again, there were dissenting voices, to be sure, but I think the community had now seen a pretty consistent multi-year position from this council that tax-exempt parcels would be included, notwithstanding what were not only dissenting voices on the dais, but voices in the audience from various different organizations, primarily the 22 churches in town who expressed their strong opposition to that notion. So for at least 2 or 3 years, there had been a fairly consistent stance from the village council, and not necessarily even the same people up here on that issue. And again, there were dissenting voices. I'm not suggesting there weren't, but clearly the majority had made a pretty clear stance. And then in the span of a couple of weeks, I would say, there's been somewhat of a change, and I think even admittedly so, a change of heart, a 180-degree turn rather quickly. So one of my concerns was that after years of a consistent message, then very suddenly it changed, and I'm not quite sure that the same opportunity for the community to understand and absorb all that they had over the several years of that issue being brought up, and people in the audience coming up and saying we should be excluded, we should be excluded. I wasn't comfortable that enough time had been given for people to react to that, and so thought that a question like this would give the public an opportunity to be aware, oh, you're making this change, notwithstanding the fact that for the last X years, the majority of the council, even in different iterations, has taken a one stance, and now, over a very short period of time, rather suddenly, it's changed. And there were other proposals, as Commissioner Rankin had pointed out, for not excluding, but to change the amount of the fee that certain organizations would pay, but there was really never any consensus to exclude tax-exempt parcels or even churches altogether. That's currently on the table, and we'll be discussing that at a council meeting, but I don't know if a couple of weeks or 2 weeks, at least in my mind, is really giving the same airtime, if you will, to the issue that it had previously received when it was the other way around. That was point number one behind this. Point number two is I think we've all heard rather passionately and repeatedly the phrase or concept of value judgment, both on this side of the dais and also in the audience. A lot of comments about either including or excluding tax-exempt parcels or houses of worship is a value judgment, and based on a value that's being ascribed, which people can disagree about, they should be either included or excluded. And I agree. I mean, just to take those words and take them a little further, I think that is arguably a value judgment. And so I just thought it would be a good idea and would encourage my colleagues to consider allowing the community to make that value judgment. We've heard it from some people on this side of the dais. We've heard it from some people on the other side of the dais. But I don't know if we've heard it more broadly from the entire community, especially given the truncated time frame that, at least in my mind, things have changed very quickly in an interesting time period. So those are the reasons why I suggested this. Now, the wording of the proposed advisory referendum question is, I'm not wedded to it. I think it was something I put together to have this conversation and to capture the gist of the idea of what I was proposing. But I wanted to explain again to my colleagues principally why I had suggested this, why I had submitted this language, and why I think it would be part of a broader community conversation on an important issue. And this is something that would be a change, and whether it's a big change or a small change or it has no change, as some have suggested, that can be debated. But I do think it is sort of a 180-degree change from where at least the message and the positioning had been at the council over a relatively short period of time. And I personally on this, given that this is a program that's in existence, it is proceeding, and we're going to back down on it potentially, that at least there would be an opportunity for that value judgment to be taken by the community, or at least give us some input on in a non-binding way as to what the community's value is, and also give the community an opportunity to have some information about what the potential financial impacts are, short-term, long-term, and then they can make their own judgment as to whether that's a big deal or not a big deal. So that was my reasoning behind proposing in the first place. Now, just for those of you who are keeping score at home, this is something that we would need direction to staff to make this happen, and could obviously work on the language. Again, I'm not wedded to the language. It can certainly be improved, the advisory question. But this is not something that I can make a motion to do as mayor, or can second a motion to do. So I would have to call upon one of my colleagues either tonight or another point in time. We do have until January 20th in order to get this on the deadline, so it certainly doesn't have to be decided tonight. I could ask for discussion. I can't make a motion. I would have to ask somebody else to make a motion to direct staff to work on a advisory referendum question of this nature. But I wanted to at least fully explain to everyone and sort of make my case of what my thinking was. So I would open it up for discussion, or if someone wants to do something, action is in your hands. That's the checks and balances of local government.
Mayor,
Commissioner?
If you don't mind, I'll just kick off, open to a bit of discussion on this one. I think the idea of engaging the community is always positive, and engaging the community in new and different ways on important issues. And clearly, this is an issue that's important to the community. So, I generally think the idea of engaging the community in this fashion is a good one. I think this, as the mayor pointed out, there's certainly been a lot of discussion on it. I personally have some significant issues with the stormwater utility itself, but I do think that this is a rather relevant question for the community and for this council. So, I certainly wouldn't be opposed to seeing this and hearing from the community, because we've heard certainly a lot on both sides of this issue, and I think that it's one of the reasons that I think the property tax model is a bit cleaner. But I think that if this is the model that this council supports and supports the continuation of, then I think that this is a relevant question. So I wouldn't be opposed to seeing something like this asked to the community, because I've certainly heard a significant amount of input from the churches, from others in the not-for-profit community, excluding churches, that this is an enormous burden. And then I've heard from some in the community that believe that everyone needs to pay their fair share, regardless of whether they're not-for-profit, for-profit business, residents, etc., that everyone should pay their fair share. So there's certainly a difference of opinion in the community, and I think that the more input we can receive on important issues like this, the better. So just my initial thoughts on this, and so I appreciate, Mayor, you bringing this up for some discussion tonight.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments or thoughts at this juncture? All right. Well, I haven't heard any action being suggested by any of my colleagues, and since I can't do it, I'm reliant upon you. If no one else wants to comment any further, or unless there's any comments from the audience, then we'll go to the next item. I'll let Commissioner Olson introduce it.
Thanks, Mayor. As I mentioned last week, and there was some discussion last week, which I appreciated, I think that the village facilities issue is a large issue for this community. I think that the decision that this council will make and the future councils will implement on this facility plan is a significant step for our community. And therefore, as I've stated consistently for several weeks, I think that one important way to engage the community is through referendum. I think referendum is a way that allows the community to express themselves in a way that is perhaps less intrusive into their own lives. It's often difficult, given modern workplace and the lives people are leading, to engage fully in some of these discussions, and unless you're forced to. And I know that a number of questions that, for example, are on this November's ballot have engendered some good discussion amongst my friends and neighbors about issues with our state or locally. So I think the idea of referendum to engage the community is a good one, and I strongly support the idea of gathering input from a wide variety of people. And I think that I appreciate the process that we've been through on facilities. I think it's been largely a good one, and with a lot of public dialogue, and we've used YouTube videos, we've used Nextdoor, we've used our traditional speaking on TV through this council meeting. We've used many, many different avenues of communication, and I think that this advisory referendum that I'm proposing supplements all that input and allows us to really fully hear from the community. So, I know there's been a concern that's been raised by a number of council members regarding the village's involvement in providing information, responding to questions, and I appreciate the staff response to this council citing the election code regarding this topic. And it clearly says that the public officials no public funds shall be used to urge electors to vote for and against a candidate or proposition. This section shall not prohibit the use of public funds for dissemination of factual information relative to any proposition appearing on an election ballot. And that's the direct quote that was provided in the staff responses from the election code. To me, I think, I'm not an attorney, but I do think that is fairly clear. I appreciate the idea that we want to engage the community, we want to engage them in a productive way and in a factual way. And I think that this referendum question, if adopted, would allow the community to engage and would allow the village to respond to questions with facts, with the information that staff has so meticulously and with a great deal of effort gathered. So I appreciate those efforts, and I think that this referendum question will further highlight to our community this major issue, because moving our police station, building a new police station, building a new village hall, a new fire station, these are actions that I think have a significant impact on the community. I think they have a significant impact on our residents, and they will certainly significantly impact the financial decisions that we make. So I think that I strongly believe that allowing the public to respond is something that I strongly support. So that's why I've proposed this referendum question, and appreciate all the feedback that I've heard so far. I know there's several members of this council that strongly feel that we shouldn't go to referendum or we shouldn't ask an advisory question, and I appreciate those comments. But I do think it's an important issue that we need to gather additional community input on, and I think the referendum is a way to reach widely beyond some of the normal folks that we may hear from. So with that, just introduction, Mayor, I don't know how you want to proceed, but if anyone else would like to comment, would enjoy the dialogue.
Questions or comments? Anybody want to weigh in? Commissioner Olson's proposal? I appreciate the discussion, as always. And one thing I just want to stop and comment on is, and I think Commissioner Barnett will agree with me on this, is that we are seeing a much more robust use of new business to engage in conversations on different ideas, and whether we think they're crazy or not, or goofy or good ideas, it is generating a better conversation than I think we've had in some other contexts. So I don't want to discourage anybody from raising ideas on a new business, even if at the end of the day nobody supports it, because this is the opportunity for sort of that incubator discussion. I mean, Commissioner Barnett could have just as easily brought up his recommendation under this heading rather than under the budget, and whether ultimately everybody thinks he's crazy or he's right. I just want to encourage more of these types of ideas, because there's an old saying is that the only way to have a really good idea is to have lots of ideas. I think Commissioner Barnett pointed out last time with the famous Skunk Works, in order to achieve some of the great innovative successes, there had to be some failures along the way in order to get there. And so I want to encourage that discussion. That being said, a couple things that I want to ask you, Commissioner, is what is it in your mind that makes the facilities proposal a big issue with a big impact? What is it specifically? Is it the dollar amount of the project?
Well, Mayor, I'd respond in that it's multifaceted. I think the dollar amount of the project is large. Certainly, that is something that's engendered a lot of discussion and input that I've received from members of the public, and members of the public that traditionally have not reached out to me in the past on other issues. So certainly, the dollar amount is significant. I think the idea of there's multiple significant issues that are being addressed here, not only a dollar amount. We have the usage of TIF funds to allow this site to be purchased and improved, so to allow the building to be constructed at the police station, fire station, fleet garage, joint facility. And I think that's something that has certainly engendered a lot of discussion as well. So that is an issue. And the movement of a fire station from one portion of the community to another, the movement of a police station from one place in the community to another. So I think that these are all important changes that would really prompt the additional scrutiny, public discussion that a referendum would provide. And the final thing I would note is there is a great deal, in my opinion, a great deal of support that I've heard from the community saying, my neighbors don't know about this. I've heard about it, read about it in the paper. I watched Channel 6 or watched the council meeting on YouTube, and so I learned about this issue. And I talked about it with my neighbors, and they had no idea. And there's certainly always, no matter where you go, you're always going to have that issue with some people, because some people, even if you put it right in front of them, they're not going to engage. But I think the referendum question allows them to engage more significantly, and in my opinion, in a project like this of such a large scope, engaging the people and gaining their support gives additional legitimacy and gives an additional power, and I think brings the community along with us. Because oftentimes, when I'm in the community, sometimes I hear about, well, why do we build such a huge fire station? It must cost a lot of money, and this is too big or too grand, or the materials, and I think allowing the community to have input in this way allows them to become more informed and allows them to be brought along as a part of this process. So I think that this is all important, and so that's why I proposed it.
I appreciate the clarification, because I've given this some thought, and certainly other people have asked the question, but I have to go back and rely upon my own experience and history with different things in the community. And I know it can't be the dollar amount, because I would be surprised if we went with option A and simply spent $10 million fixing the current facilities, and anybody would suggest we need to go out for a referendum for that. And yet, in fact, I think that's even a proposal that some have suggested would be their preference. But that's $10 million. It's a lot of money by anybody's measure, and no one would suggest we're going out for referendum for that. Likewise, I think on Saturday, we discussed $26 million in capital projects. No one suggested we need to go to a referendum for that, and we've done many other projects of that nature, bonding and whatnot, that can reflect some pretty big dollars, and yet as a normal course, we don't go out for referendum, advisory, or binding on those things. So I know it's not about the dollars, which is why I asked. And I appreciate that, because you pointed out some other things, such as relocating the facilities, which sure, people would have an interest in whether something was here or there. But also just taking that element, we've done many different things. We combined our 911 call center with Westmont, and we didn't go out for a referendum on that. There's a lot of things that we do to try to provide services better or more efficiently that we don't necessarily go out for an advisory referendum on. The use of TIF funds, that's one I hadn't heard before, so I'm glad you mentioned it. And yet, on that one, I have to think about it a little bit more, because we have an established TIF policy that dictates when we would utilize TIF dollars, either the downtown TIF or the Ogden Avenue TIF for different projects. TIFs were created, there weren't referendums there, and dollars have been used from those funds for various development projects. They've been discussed publicly with a lot of public input, but usually in the context of their particular usage, and we haven't done it there. The engagement point, I know, is one that you've mentioned before, and I think you and I just have a difference of opinion as to what public engagement is. The couple things I just want to add is I saw the language with respect to what it is that the municipality can and can't do vis-a-vis any advisory referendum. And while I read the words, it's really the interpretation that matters. Because one thing I do have the experience of is having been through a referendum. It wasn't advisory, it was a binding referendum in this community on the topic of home rule, and I actually saw practically firsthand what the village could and couldn't do. And that's where my concerns really come from. It's not looking at the language, it's knowing as a practical matter what that means. And it's I think on any measure, it's going to be a narrowing of the ability to engage, not a broadening, just because of how that language is followed in practice. And I'm not just speculating. I can look back to an actual binding referendum that was one that affected a very important aspect of this community. The other part of that is, I mean, let's face it, if you really want to engage the community, you want to engage the community and not limit yourself just to people who are registered voters that come out and vote. If you really want to engage the community, you would want to go out and engage the entire community, whether they're registered to vote or not. So the referendum, by definition, is going to give you a smaller slice of that pie. But my real concern is that you have raised this issue about neighbors, friends, whomever, who don't seem to understand. I think Commissioner Durkin even mentioned it, that he's run some people who didn't understand what this was all about. Well, then we have other ways of dealing with it that I think don't suffer from the handicaps of the binding referendum process. I mean, for example, the big dollar amount, people see the $52 million, but hypothetically speaking, if there was a $52 million expenditure with $52 million of matching revenue and it was a net zero impact upon the community, I think you get a very different reaction from people. So, well, what is this going to mean for my taxes? Hypothetically speaking, no impact. Oh, well, that's a different story altogether. Just tonight, the scouts from Kingsley School asked me a question, well, how much does this community spend? And I mentioned $124 million budget. Oh, my goodness gracious, that's a lot of money. But it's a balanced budget. We don't spend more than we have. And then people hear that, like, oh, well, that's a different story. So part of it is, I think, engaging folks in a way that you can have that dynamic conversation. And the other part of it is, this is a fluid process. And I'm explaining why my view on this is not completely 100%, 180 degrees different than my view on the other question. Because this is a fluid, dynamic process. This process will necessarily change as it goes forward and matures, because you're dealing with moving parts. You're not dealing with, do we keep these people in or out? It's not a very straightforward question like that. It's, as the negotiations go on, as things change, maybe it's not a $52 million project anymore. And so to have something that's out there that may not even reflect what the real question is by the time you get to it, I have a real concern with. What I would propose instead is that we've become very good, very skilled and engaging the community in ways that I would suggest are without equal in DuPage County in terms of engaging the public. What I would propose is that instead what we do is we have a series of town hall meetings, and we go out even beyond what we've done. To the extent that you have neighbors or friends who have said they're interested in this issue but don't understand it, then we ought to be reaching out to them with all our various contacts and other means of social media and whatnot. And we ought to have a series of scheduled public meetings, town hall meetings. Folks can show up. I'd like to propose that we do at least one virtual one, so people don't even have to leave their homes. They can weigh in this topic, deal with this real time, talk about the subject, but the better part about that is we will be completely free to answer questions. And as time passes, and maybe even the details of the project have changed, as they always do, as you get into the nitty-gritty, we'll be able to react to those things and answer people's questions more effectively. So I want to first of all say I appreciate you raising that concern about the level of engagement and the fact that there's a segment of the community that seems to not understand what's really going on behind the picture. And I get that because there's a lot of moving parts in this project. It's a very innovative, creative, far more private sector type of project than a public sector type of project. And I think it does really cries out for that kind of dynamic, shifting ability to engage. And I think that we have tools and things that we've done in the past have been very successful. I think we can utilize technology to even take it another step forward. And we have to schedule a series of them, including the concept of the partnerships that we have all directed staff to pursue as vigorously as possible. Those afford other opportunities. So I would like to, what I'm going to really say is I'd like to take your idea and take it a step further and propose that we instruct staff to put together a series of town hall meetings where the entire village council staff can be at the meeting and actively, dynamically engage the public with whatever question is that they might bring up and have that information, and then as it may change over time, to be able to respond with the most current information, not something that is fixed for all time, and then if circumstances change, suddenly the question that's being asked no longer fits the circumstances. Those are the kind of fears I have. And then last, just to emphasize why I'm not being a complete hypocrite and not being in favor of this one, but was in favor of the other one, they're really apples and oranges. The inclusion of who's in the stormwater utility is a question that has been discussed, as I said earlier, for years. And the question is a very simple one. Do tax-exempt parcels go in or out? And then we have the dollars of what that means. I don't think there is a level of engagement. It's something that we've discussed for years with folks, and I think people understand the issue. We know because they've come to the meetings telling us they understand the issue. I don't think anyone has been approached by their neighbors saying, I don't understand the excluding of tax-exempt parcels. I think everybody understands that. It's a much narrower, and I think a much more easily understood question. Furthermore, I think that one is fixed in terms of the yes or no question. It's not a facilities project that by its very dynamic nature is going to change over time. So just from my perspective, because I think people are going to ask us, well, what's wrong with putting this out for a referendum? Don't you want to hear from the people? I want to say that I appreciate you raising that. I would like to even take it another level. I think there's better ways to achieve the same goal of engagement, which I agree with you completely, and I don't think anyone up here disagrees, is something that on a project of this complexity and novelty in some degrees, is something that we do need to double down on our community engagement.
Well, Mayor, I
So it's not the idea, it's the implementation that I disagree with.
I appreciate the comments he made, and I do recognize that we do have some time to discuss this type of action, because it is only October 14th. We have until January 20th to place something on the ballot. So with that in mind, I certainly would support the idea that you've proposed tonight regarding a series of town hall meetings. I think that town hall meetings would allow the community to be engaged directly and could be marketed and targeted towards residents, and perhaps scheduled at, as you mentioned, a virtual town hall meeting scheduled at different times other than perhaps Tuesday night, because I know that night is challenging for some residents to come out. So I think that the idea of town hall meetings is something that I would support, and in my perspective, I think that town hall meetings would require obviously some planning on behalf, on the part of staff and on the part of this council to ensure that we'd have good participation from here, and also for the marketing of that. But I'd also think that if we're to pursue that, we should do it in a fairly expeditious fashion, as this is something that's being discussed and expenditures contemplated in our 2015 budget. So with that, I agree that having those type of meetings would be something that's positive. I still think that a referendum question would be a good one, but I would certainly be open to waiting some time and allowing those type of meetings to occur, and then perhaps refining language, repropose a referendum. But I think that town hall meetings would be a great step in the right direction of engaging the community. So thank you for the suggestion, Mayor. I don't know if there's if anyone else thinks that'd be a good idea or a bad idea at the town hall meetings.
Thank you, Mayor. This is funny because last Wednesday I spoke to Manager Fieldman asking additional questions, and I brought up, have we thought about a town hall meeting? So I am very comfortable with the town hall meeting. I think that is the piece that's lacking here, because everything we talk about and we have spoken about, in my opinion, has been something that's been drafted off of a whiteboard. Some can say that it looks like a napkin with A, B, C, D, and we've never gone to the next step. And I was part of the conversation I had with the manager about getting more information that I could totally be able to sell to anyone who brings this up to me about the square footage of the buildings, to what's being proposed in there. So many things that I think is critical in the missing part of this. So I don't support a referendum on this, but I do support the idea of having the town hall meeting. We've done a great job as a village council, as staff, to getting our word out there about everything and anything that we've done in the past, from the way we plow snow, to plow the streets, to you name it. I mean, we do it, and I would commend us, the staff, for doing it, if we can get it done within a reasonable amount of time, because last meeting, there was a comment made that we have some votes coming up in November, December that are gonna relay into what we do with this Village Hall, police station on Ogden. So that's my 2 cents. But I like that virtual thing. I didn't even think of that.
It's a good one.
Another private sector thing we do all the time.
Yeah.
Commissioner? Either commissioner. Ladies first.
Okay. So, there's a lot of conversation here, and I appreciate everything that everyone's saying. The one thing that David was saying was that, people are busy in their lives and they don't have time to engage. So we've been doing all the efforts that the village does very well, trying to communicate about what this project means. And like I said last week, my fear is that by making it a referendum, then it's limited to a single question. And you yourself, David, said that it's a very complex issue. There's a lot of things, the money, the TIF issue, moving the fire station, the police station. And I think limiting that to a sentence on a ballot really constricts the ability to provide the whole story. And, my question to Enza is, if it doesn't look like this is going to move forward, but if there is a referendum placed on a ballot, does staff's response turn into being limited to a fact sheet right when that decision is made, or is it from January to whenever the vote is placed, or when
It's
does
the
that
whole,
happen?
it's the whole period. They have the opportunity, and it's not limited to just a fact sheet. I mean, you can still advocate, so long as it's all factual.
Okay, but we couldn't be necessarily pushing out information like we do now. It would be, here's the information about the project.
Not necessarily. I mean, there's.
So there's no restrictions?
Well, you have a
The restrictions are the use of public funds to disseminate factual information. You couldn't sway or advocate for one side or the other.
The problem is not in the factual information. The problem is helping people interpret the factual information. That's where the real limitation comes in. If somebody asks you how many inches are in a foot, you can give them that answer, but you can't explain, well, should I use centimeters or inches? I'm sorry, there are 12 inches in a foot. I can't tell you whether you should use centimeters or inches. I mean, that's again, one of my very poor analogies, Commissioner, but
it limits the ability.
But that's where really
to
the problem is.
explain.
Yes, it's the ability to dynamically engage with someone and say, well, what does that mean? Why, I can't tell you. I can only tell you how many inches are in a foot.
Okay.
Okay, and I would support a town hall meeting or any way to provide more information out to the residents for them to, analyze this issue and provide feedback. I just am afraid that going to referendum is limiting our ability to push out information and explain and talk.
And help people understand the information that we're providing. That's the real key in my view.
Thank you, that was all I had to add.
Thank you. Commissioner Jose?
Thank you, Mayor. For all the reasons that have already been stated, I won't belabor them. Yeah, I also don't favor going out to referendum on this. I do really like the idea of town hall meetings, and I hope it's more than just one. Whether it's a virtual town hall meeting or a series of them, different locations, different times, different days, the more information we get out, the better. And I do want to emphasize the number of different ways that we can receive information back from people. There's obviously email and phone, and those can be found easily on our website. There's the website that pushes information out to folks. The village is on Facebook, Twitter. We've heard about folks reading the newspaper and picking up on what's going on in terms of the facilities discussion from that. If folks still do pick the newspaper up and read that. So, and there's the remark system right there on our website that folks can take advantage of to give input back to us. But I do share those concerns about the ability to get information out and explain it if we do go to referendum. The last thing I would like to see us do is go from the dynamic engagement that we have on a typical basis and put ourselves in a box in terms of what we can do thanks to the election code and concern about any complaints that might be filed as a result of just our usual level of engagement and explanation with the community. Folks have come to expect a high level of engagement, and I think we owe that to them. And I think the town hall meetings are a good way to go about that. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I'll jump in. Obviously, town hall meetings are going to be supported by everybody. How can you not? But I want to just make a little bit of a point about our meetings and our process. Pretty much the first 3 Tuesdays of every month, we have a town hall meeting. We always have a position on our agenda for open public comment. We just had a Saturday meeting about our budget where there was contemplated funds to be spent for the facilities discussion on Saturday. We're going to have another one this Saturday, open for any conversation. We've had multiple special workshops, if you will, both here in this room and next door, where we could have the dining room table set up, and many residents have joined us. I feel like, and the mayor said this, we go out of our way and actually are probably better than not only DuPage County, but maybe our state, maybe even our country, and how we try to get information out to people. Commissioner Olson even said, neighbors have seen it in the paper, but they're not sure. Well, we try our hardest to get the papers to write and print the information as they see fit, and they do a pretty good job. But it is incumbent on us to describe and understand the projects and the actions that we're taking up here. Referendum questions are simple. They do limit, either if it's by use of public funds or what we can and can't say or do, we're limited. I wouldn't want to be limited in a discussion like this. I think it's important that we all find our own ways, the 7 of us, plus the staff and the regular village process team, to get the word out to our friends, neighbors, and folks across the fence and at the grocery store. Every year we pass a budget that's about $44 million. Sometimes it's 39.2, sometimes it's $42 million. We don't have referendum questions for that. We have huge discussions all the time that do affect everybody. Last week was a $2 million, I think it was on this week's consent agenda, $2 million touch to every house about your water meter, everybody that uses water. We didn't have a referendum question for that. I appreciate the desire from my colleagues to try to get more information out there, but I do think that this particular referendum question, any referendum question, does limit what we can and can't do. And I want to throw out there the town hall meeting idea. I think it's been coming from lots of angles, but Commissioner Barnett and I had a conversation about it weeks ago. Commissioner Durkin and the manager had it. I think we all kind of had that thought as the referendum idea first came up, that what can we do more? But let's also be aware that more means more time for our staff, more means more energy and more action for not only us but our staff, and hopefully we can find a way to have residents come and join us, and we will all do our best to get that word out there. I would suggest to anybody that if there's any other means of communication that we aren't using, to bring them forward and let us know what might be working in your world, to see if that could be incorporated into our plans. But we've said it a few times, the front page of our website's loaded with different ways to communicate with your village. And I think we do a great job of that every day, not only for discussions like this, but general issues that are happening in our community. So I actually wanted to say thank you to the reporters that are here tonight, because I'm sure this will generate a lot of interesting storylines, and folks maybe will be directed to the village website where they can learn more, see videos, and see what this program and process is all about for the facilities discussion. So thank you for that, Mayor, and I appreciate the extra time.
Sure. Commissioner?
Guess I ought to add my 2 cents, as long as we all are. I don't have any interest in either one of these. Let me just add to the list, Mayor, you started it, let me add to the list of some things we did without a referendum. We created a stormwater utility. Didn't ask about that one. We created those TIFs. If I'm correct, I guess correct me when I'm wrong, but I don't think we had a referendum when we closed the fire station. We don't have referendums when we engage in contracts. Contracts commit the village to multiple year expenditures, often as much as we're exceeding the potential expenditures on this facility. We don't go out for referendum on that either. Referendums are lousy. Anybody that says they're a good way of informing I can't begin to understand how that could be other than it's some sort of a game. The fact is, you are allowed roughly 1, maybe 2 sentences on a referendum. It informs nobody. Now, does it provide opportunity for the public to weigh in on a question? Absolutely. But informing, as the mayor has more eloquently than I put, is an exercise that we can and should engage irrespective of a referendum. Asking folks to decide something based on 2 sentences or a sentence on a ballot is kind of nutty. If you want to get into subjects about the general theory of government, it's interesting to get input in a non-binding way. Choosing expenditures on detailed technical subjects is not the realm of a referendum. Mayor, you touched on it when you mentioned it before. Frankly, we went through the referendum on home rule, and one of the things that comes out of that is, now there's a structural question. Should you guys or should you not be home rule? It didn't say, should you spend $62 on this or $84 on that? Should their government be able to operate as a home rule community? The answer was yes. Well, this is an example of exercising that authority. We exercise that authority day in and day out. Colleagues up here that don't want to spend $52 million maybe, or maybe not, without referendum have no problem passing $120 million budgets annually. It's kind of, I'm trying to understand exactly where this comes from, and I suspect that it comes from sort of the theater of wanting to make sure that we're positioned properly for future rhetoric. We spend those kinds of tens of millions of dollars every single day and have for decades. And 10 years ago or so, we asked whether or not we still wanted home rule authority, and everybody said, yeah, you know what, you probably should retain it. We are in the business of making decisions. One of my colleagues up here last week said that's exactly what we're elected for, to decide these kinds of things, set priorities, set direction, engage staff to execute it. We should continue to do that. As Jeff said, nobody's going to be opposed to a public meeting. It's a great idea. Let's do 2 of them. Let's do 3 of them. Teletown halls, whatever. That, though, is an incumbent responsibility on us anytime. I mean, you could argue that we just went through that. Nobody wants me to say the C word around here, chicken again. But we had an issue, right? And we didn't go to referendum and say, you guys want chickens? We held a series of public meetings. Do I think they went on too long? You bet, I do. But it's not like this council or the ones before it or the staff are somehow trying to make decisions without public engagement. We continually step up and ask for it when we think there's an issue that has a heightened sense of interest, which is kind of a shame because we have a lot of interest right now about the budget, which is great. It's the first time in a long time. Usually we get no interest, so that's cool. But the idea of a referendum is just, I think, misplaced theater in my mind. So I have no interest in either one of these. I have every interest in the world of being totally available to anybody in the public at any time for questions. I would say, I would push all my colleagues a little bit, if you'll allow me, Mayor. Commissioner Durkin, Commissioner Olson in particular, because you guys made the comments. If you're not feeling comfortable talking about it and getting into the details, get there. We'll all help you, the staff will. But when your neighbor comes up to you in the garage and says, hey man, I can't believe you guys are going to spend millions of dollars on a Taj Mahal like Fire Station 2, you better have a better answer for the rest of this team that we call the village, which is 49,000 residents, other than, oh man, can you believe they don't even want public input on it? There are lots of meetings that we've all been part of, and we all know lots of facts. And the answers to those questions should be readily available to each of us at a moment's notice. If they're not, get there. that's, so, I'm sorry, that was probably a little pompous, but I can't stand it when we walk around here acting like we're not sure what we're talking about. If we're not, that's our own fault. Thanks, Mayor.
Commissioner Olson, usually the proponent vote gets the first and last word.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank my colleagues. In response to the comments of Commissioner Barnett, I would note that I think I feel quite comfortable about what's being proposed, and clearly there's some difference of opinion about what's been proposed, and my opinion on what seems to have majority support and what I think is the right thing to do. But I don't think I've stated that I don't understand it. But did want to say I appreciate the support of my colleagues in further engaging the public through a referendum. Not through a referendum, through a town hall meeting. I still think a referendum is a good idea. Clearly, my colleagues do not, and I think that that's, we're one of the reasons we're elected, and we can disagree, and I think that, I respect that. But I appreciate the support for the idea of a town hall meeting. I think that the more we can engage residents in this process and hear from them and hear their thoughts, their ideas, their concerns, maybe assuage their concerns, the better we are as a community. So with that, Mayor, I appreciate the conversation and thank my colleagues for their input and thoughts during this meeting.
Well, thank you. The question has been asked by other people, so it's not as though you're the only person that's raised it, regardless of what everyone's views are on the subject, including my own. It's not something you're the only person I've heard it from. So I think it's well worth the time spent on the conversation. Since I seem to hear unanimous support for town hall meetings, I think it's important that we do have more than one. I think it's important that we perhaps have them at times and places that aren't necessarily the most convenient for us, but perhaps by design are more designed to be more convenient for residents, and they're taking it to them at times that aren't necessarily our typical meeting hours, which aren't always convenient for people with the various activities they're engaged in. I think having a virtual one that allows people literally to engage without having to go anywhere, but through their computers or their pads or their smartphones, I think is something that we've talked about in prior years. Certainly I'm not the first one to mention it, but I think if there's not a better opportunity to utilize that available technology on this topic, I don't know what there is. And I think that we've seen that be very effective in other contexts. And I think the public appreciates our making this happen above and beyond, even though it's above and beyond the above and beyond. I agree with Commissioner Newstead on that. Let's face it, it's a complicated issue, and I think it deserves that extra attention, and it may mean we need to not necessarily do a lot more work, because I think we do understand a lot of the details of the project, but I think it's the conversation that really needs to take place, and maybe doing that in times and places that aren't necessarily convenient for our sort of pattern and practices, but making it more convenient, both in geography and time for residents. And people, I think, do like to be invited to town hall meetings, or whatever you want to call it, for a specific purpose. It's not just show up and let's talk about whatever's on your mind. We do lots of that, but this is a very targeted, specific project that there is a high degree of interest and awareness of on some level throughout the community. And I think that there can be no, and everyone has said this, there can be no downside to that, regardless of what your view is on Commissioner Olson's suggestion. So, but I think on that topic, you've probably heard more direction than you necessarily would like.
Yes, sir.
All right, any discussion from the audience? We can start the town hall meeting. Any discussion from the audience, questions or comments about, well, actually, I guess technically it would be Commissioner Olson's suggestion about an advisory referendum question. Very good. Hearing none, then I guess I need to ask, just to be sure, do any of my colleagues have any new items of new business that they would like to raise tonight? Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Rankin.
Thank you. Sorry I didn't bring it up.
I thought you were just smiling.
No. Sorry I didn't bring it up sooner or inform you ahead of time, but it seems like that's the way things have been going lately, so. I've been thinking about a lot of things we've heard lately from my colleagues, from the public, and I'd like to just put the idea out there now. We have time, to discuss it another time, but just kind of let my colleagues think about it. that maybe we should consider relooking at the sign ordinance and having a more elaborate review, and maybe asking the Finance and Administration Committee to lead a discussion on that, where we really kind of dig into it and look at it and take into all the considerations, you know, that people have mentioned to us over the years. It's been 10 years since it was put into place. We have a lot of different folks up here, different staff. You know, maybe there's changes, tweaks, additions that should be considered. Maybe we should just have a, kind of like a workshop-y, let's go through it and talk about it kind of thing.
I agree with you 100%. Somebody who was here before there was a sign ordinance, I remember very distinctly, even when it was first pursued, that it was not supposed to be something that was fixed forever in a certain way, but as needed, as with any ordinance, whether it's our zoning code, long-range plan, you name it, things should be adjusted where it makes sense. That's why we have a variance project, a process, but sometimes you need a variance of even the ordinance itself. I would agree with that. You raise something that I think is an intriguing idea, and that is creating some kind of forum to at least initially identify what the issues are. Because, once again, and then I'm going to sound like a broken record, I'm always hesitant to just sort of say, pardon me, I need a prop. Commissioner Waldeck will appreciate this, I'm going to use a prop. Former Commissioner Waldeck. I'm always reticent to simply hand staff something and say, here, take a look at it. I think we know of a number of different specific instances of concerns that have been raised, but perhaps what you're suggesting, Commissioner, which I think is a really good idea, is maybe at least having an initial phase where one of the standing committees serves as a sounding board, not necessarily doing any work, but sort of identifying what are the things, now that we've had how many years under the sign ordinance, and I'm sure staff already has a list very long, but if we were to do that and invite members of the business community, members of the other governing bodies, whoever it is, who say, well, look, now that we've been operating under this ordinance for X number of years, here's the things we've been finding in the field. I know some of that we're addressing in our current processes, but there are some things that the current structure doesn't allow and may not even allow through the variance process. For example, the railroad sign issue, you can't get a variance for that. Or maybe I shouldn't say that, but
You'd have to go through the process, so yes, it is eligible for variation.
all right, it is eligible for variance, but there are certain things that may not even be reflected in the language and may not lend themselves to that necessarily. So if what you're suggesting is that maybe that be used as a capturing methodology to identify what the issues are, and then we add them to the list of things that we already know about, and I know staff knows about more of this stuff than we do, that's a very intriguing idea.
Mayor, I just want to comment that I want to thank Commissioner Rankin for raising this idea. I know that in the last meeting we had, I know Commissioner Jose and myself both discussed the idea of a review of the sign ordinance, and what Commissioner Rankin's proposed with the ideas that Mayor Tully proposed, I think is a very reasonable, thoughtful way to go about this type of activity, and I think could lead to some positive changes and some positive dialogue amongst the entire community. So I appreciate Commissioner Rankin's suggestion.
And obviously, we're doing it tonight. I'm sorry, Commissioner, we're not doing it tonight. If we're following past practice, what we would do is put this on the new business agenda for next time for more discussion. I'm sure staff will have more they want to say about it, but I think that's what we're talking about right now.
Exactly.
Sorry, Commissioner.
Let's just be really clear, though, that we're still enforcing the existing sign ordinance. We're still enforcing and asking for compliance of the existing sign ordinance. I don't want anybody, whether it's a sign owner now or another government agency, to take this new business item as an open door to, well, I'll just wait. You
No,
can't.
that's not
We
what
have the code. It's now, do it. And I think that maybe some separation from the current processes that are in place. There's folks in for variation now. There's applications in now. There's folks that have permits that haven't changed their sign now. I think maybe a gap between time to let that finish out, settle out, try to get an understanding of where the actual final compliance is might be a wise path, so we don't start to cross over into what's happening currently into what we may change or may even not change or make stricter. I just want to be real careful that we make sure that that's clear to our business owners and sign owners.
How long would you suggest waiting?
Well, we're in October. I would say that, we need to give it a little bit more time. I think there's still some current pending applications and current pending zoning and variation processes that have yet to take place. I would lean staff to see how many and what the contemplated time would be for that, but it certainly is something that I don't want to get people confused or leave an idea that, well, they're going to talk about it, maybe they'll change it, and then I can go with the new ordinance.
The compliance period is really just now right at its height. We've contacted all sign owners 3 times, and those who have an issue, we've contacted at least 4 or 5 times. And we're down to just 50 that have not made an attempt to comply out of a universe of 2,250. We have a dozen or so variations pending, some that we talked about applying. We have 13 citations issued that are currently in the court process. From an application and an enforcement process, I think discussing the content of an ordinance that you're in the middle of a multi-year enforcement effort could prove extremely challenging and difficult to get results.
Well, but realistically, we could be in the court process for 3 years, and I don't think anyone's suggesting that we're not going to talk about the sign ordinance for 3 years.
No,
That's just, obviously, we're not talking about, which is why I asked the question, how long would you wait? Because if you're going to say, so long as there are no variances in the hopper, that may never not be the case.
That's
There might always be traffic on the street, you got to cross it eventually. And likewise, someone could take this to court for 3 to 5 years. I mean, welcome to my world, that could go on for a long time. I don't think anybody's suggesting that we can't even talk about changes for 3 to 5 years. I'm using an exaggeration on purpose, but that's the point. And furthermore, as I understood Commissioner Rankin, not, again, not to put words in your mouth, is at this point, you're not talking about changes, you're simply identifying what the issue. I bet you if we had the Chamber of Commerce director here right now, we'd have a list of 10 in about 5 minutes. I think you were talking more about acting as the legislative flypaper, if you will, and getting a list of the issues. Not saying anything's changing or not, but identifying what they are. And then when the time comes, because there's also a workload issue, I get that, when the time comes to revisit it, you have a well-defined list, and it's not just the one that I know you've already have in your, I know you guys know what they are, but it's another opportunity for saying, hey, we haven't just been keeping notes for the last 10 years, we're also going to give you a specific opportunity, like Commissioner Rankin suggests, to bring other ideas to the fore to add to the list. Now, when we get to the list, that's another discussion, because that's going to have to do with the capacity of staff, and I understand the implications of discussing changes in the middle of enforcement proceedings, but let's face it, there's never going to be any good time. There might be better times than others, but there's never going to be a good time.
I think we just heard that right now isn't a good time.
I don't think that was what was being suggested.
Okay, well, that's great. I just want to make that clear to all the sign owners that are out there that are still going for compliance, that we're trying to help and facilitate their compliance.
Am I missing something? I apologize, but I'm not keeping up with this conversation. Haven't we periodically changed building codes, haven't we periodically changed zoning ordinances? We don't say, well, let's wait till we don't have building permits in, do we? What? I mean, it maybe right at the moment of trying to sort out the budget isn't the best time to really allocate staff resources, to be sure. But the idea that there's, I mean, the world's going on with or without us, why would we not start into something like this? I'm missing it. Or am I not? Maybe I'm not keeping up.
I think the difference is we have never had an amortization deadline that has come and gone and put it as a high priority action item to get 100% compliance and then get to 94% and then reopen it. That's the issue we were bringing up. The question was, when should we look at it? I would say probably once we get through the 50 remaining with some kind of, are they going to attempt to comply or are they ready to be taken to court, would be a logical time frame to relook at the question.
I understand that, I do. I think really what this is, what Commissioner Rankin's talking about is planning for looking at it, not the actual looking at it part. I mean, I think Commissioner Newstadt's right, you don't want to undermine your current efforts. You do want to manage expectations, you don't want to give people false hope. I get that. On the other hand, quick story, because it's late and I'm going to tell you one. Was before a United States federal magistrate judge not too long ago on a case that I had before the new laws with respect to medical marijuana went into effect. And the judge was still sentencing people for violating the law, even though law had been fully announced and had been passed and was going to change, not a question of maybe, was going to change. People were being sentenced under the old law. The fact that there was a new law coming did not somehow absolve people of responsibility for complying with the current law that was in place. And that's in the criminal context. So I understand these concerns, but I think Commissioner Barnett's right. I mean, we're always making changes, and the fact that somebody may have built a deck under one code a year ago, and then we changed the code with respect to decks, they don't come back to us and say, hey, I want you to pay to make my deck the way it would have been because I followed the old code. We're not that rigid, but I do understand the concerns about being in a current enforcement mode. We don't want to give false hope. We want to manage expectations appropriately, avoid surprises, and not undermine our current efforts, because we also wouldn't want to undermine the prosecution of that person who thought it was medical marijuana day before it was medical marijuana day. I get that, but I don't think that's what Commissioner Rankin is proposing, unless I'm mistaken.
And this is just an introduction of a concept for us to discuss if there's support at another meeting, right?
That's what I understood you to be saying.
Yeah.
Just to throw in, excuse me, just to throw in my 2 cents, I would love to continue the discussion. I think this is, as Commissioner Olson mentioned, we talked about being interested in a larger discussion about the sign ordinance, and I think this is a good way to kick that off.
So if we're following our recent practice, would we put this on new business for our next meeting? We've actually talked about it a great deal. I don't know if we have to, but I think that's what we've been doing. So I would look to you to suggest, should we follow that same practice and put this item down for further direction next week? I don't know if it has to be next week.
I will not be here.
Okay, then we won't do it next week. Any future date, would that be acceptable, Commissioner? Does anyone have an objection to that? Hearing none, does that make sense?
Yes.
I love those quick answers. Yes. All right. Thank you, Commissioner. Any other items of new business that any members of the Village Council like to raise at this point in time? Hearing none, I will then ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.